The night my brother tried to have me escorted out of our own mother's funeral was the night I finally stopped pretending my family was normal. I still remember the sound of the wind outside the church, the soft rustle of black coats, the smell of white lilies, and the way every single person in that room turned to look at me like I was the problem. My brother, Cole, stood near the front with a hand on our mother's casket, his face smooth and sorrowful, like he had been born to wear grief better than anyone else in the room. He had that same look he always had when the family was watching him, that polished, innocent expression that made people believe he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. He wasn't. He was carrying secrets, and I was the only one who knew it. "Lena, not here," Cole whispered when I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the church floor. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were hard. "Please don't make a scene." A scene. That was Rich. My mother had just been buried, my aunt was crying into a tissue, my cousins were staring at the stained glass windows like they hoped this all might disappear, and my brother was worrying about a scene. I looked at him, then at the packed pews, then at the framed photograph of our mother near the flowers. She was smiling in that picture, all pearls and soft gray hair, looking like the kind of woman who had never lied in her life. If only that were true. "I'm not making a scene," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm asking why there are two copies of Mom's will, and why one of them has your name on every page in a different ink." Cole's face didn't change right away. That was the first thing that scared me. Not the anger, not the shock, the pause. The tiny delay before his expression shifted into something controlled, almost practiced. He leaned in just enough for me to hear him. "You should leave." "What did you do?" I asked. That was when my uncle stood up too fast in the second row, my cousin dropped her program, and every person in that church understood that whatever family story they had thought they knew was about to crack open. Cole gave me a tiny smile that didn't belong at a funeral. "You should have stayed in your lane, little sister." That sentence followed me for years. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment my life split in two. The version of me before I knew the truth, and the version of me who would spend the next 3 years tearing my family's perfect image apart until nothing false was left standing. Before all of that, though, my family looked rich, polished, and lucky from the outside. We lived in a big colonial house outside Richmond, Virginia, with an old iron gate, a long driveway, and a lawn that was always trimmed just right. My father, Richard Bell, ran a construction supply company that everyone in town respected. My mother, Marlene, was the kind of woman who knew everybody's birthday, mailed handwritten thank you notes, and hosted holiday dinners where the table looked like something out of a magazine. And my older brother, Cole, was the golden child. That was the phrase people used when they thought they were being kind. At family gatherings, adults would ruffle his hair and tell him he was so sharp, so responsible, so much like your father. When Cole graduated with honors from the state university, my mother cried so hard she had to sit down. When he landed a management job at one of my father's biggest suppliers, my father bought him a new truck. When he got engaged to a woman named Tessa, my mother planned the entire engagement dinner herself and said she had never seen a couple more meant to be. As for me, I was the other one, the quiet daughter, the creative one, the one who loved books, design, and taking apart old things to make them useful again. I wasn't a rebel exactly, but I was never the easy shape my family wanted me to be. I asked questions. I noticed things. I was the kid who saw the cracks in the walls and the tension behind smiles. Cole hated that. When I was 12, he told me in the back seat of our mom's car, "You always make everything uncomfortable." I remember staring out the window and not answering him because I had already learned that in our house, the safest thing was silence. The funny part is that everyone thought Cole was the one protecting the family. He was always the one stepping in to help when something needed to be signed. He was the one who took Mom to appointments when Dad worked late. He was the one who managed the accounts when my father was too tired to keep up. He was the one who handled the insurance paperwork after my father had his first heart episode. He was the one who made sure the bills got paid on time, the business stayed running, and the family image stayed spotless. What nobody saw was how carefully he controlled everything. He controlled the passwords. He controlled calendars. He controlled who got access to what. He even controlled the narrative. And in a family like mine, the narrative was everything. If he said I was oversensitive, then I was oversensitive. If he said a problem was just my imagination, then suddenly I was the problem for bringing it up. If he said Mom was confused, then people nodded and looked sympathetic because age can make families lazy in how they explain things. I wish I could say I saw it all clearly from the beginning. I didn't. I was in my 20s, working as a junior interior designer at a firm downtown, trying to build a life that was mine. I had a small apartment, a used car that squealed when it rained, and a dream that someday I'd open my own studio. I wasn't rich, but I was free, in a way I had never been in my parents' house. Still, I came home on weekends. I answered every call. I showed up for every family dinner, every birthday, every holiday. Because that's what daughters do when they still hope their family might love them in the way they always needed. Then things started going strange. At first, it was small. My father would ask me if I had signed papers I had never seen. My mother would casually mention conversations she had supposedly had with me that never happened. Cole would say he had already talked to me about a property issue or a payment delay or a trust decision, and I would deny it, only for him to laugh and tell everyone I was forgetful. Then Mom began repeating herself. Not in a dramatic way, just enough that the little things began to feel off. She would tell me the same story twice in one afternoon, or ask me whether I had eaten breakfast when I was standing in front of her with the empty mug she had already watched me wash. When I brought it up, Cole was suddenly very concerned. "Mom's just tired," he said. "You know how she gets when Dad's been under stress." But my mother was not just tired. She was being moved through her own life like someone else held the remote. I didn't understand that at first. I only knew that whenever I asked questions, Cole got sharper. He would answer me with this calm, patient tone that made other people think he was being reasonable while making me feel like a child. And then Dad got worse. My father had always been strong, in the rough, old-fashioned way some men are strong. He worked early, ate fast, and never complained about pain. So when he started missing phone calls and forgetting appointments, I assumed he was worn down by age and pressure. But one night at dinner, he asked me if I had moved the silverware drawers around in the kitchen. The drawers had not been moved. My mother laughed awkwardly. Cole poured more water into his glass. Nobody said anything. That night, after my parents went to bed, I confronted Cole in the hallway. "What is going on?" I demanded. "Something is wrong with them." He looked at me like I was inconveniencing him. "They're getting older, Lena. Not everything is a conspiracy." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk to me. Like I'm stupid." That got his attention. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You need to stop poking into things that aren't your business. Then make them my business by acting normal." He gave me a cold smile. "You should spend more time on your own life." That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning. 2 weeks later, my father asked me to come to the house early on a Sunday morning. He looked exhausted, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal folder in front of him and his coffee untouched. My mother was upstairs napping. Cole wasn't there yet. Dad said, "I need you to listen carefully." That got my full attention. He slid a folder toward me. "I don't remember signing these." I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was a draft of revised estate documents, a transfer of authority, and a list of assets being restructured in a way that made my father's company in the house and several accounts all point toward one person, Cole. "Dad," I whispered, "did you know about this?" He rubbed his forehead. "Your mother said she discussed it with me." "Did she?" "No." My hands were shaking. "Then who prepared it?" He looked up, and for the first time I saw real fear in my father's face. "Cole brought it to me. He said it was to simplify things. He said I'd signed a preliminary authorization months ago." I went cold. My father leaned back slowly. "I thought maybe I had forgotten. I thought maybe I wasn't keeping up like I used to. But yesterday I asked the lawyer to send over a copy, and there are things in here I know I never approved." I looked through the papers again and saw a signature that looked like my father's from a distance, but not in the details. It was too smooth, too sure. Not him at all. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. He swallowed. Because if I'm losing my memory, I need someone in this house to tell me the truth. I wanted to scream right then. I wanted to run upstairs, shake my mother awake, and force everyone into the same room until the whole charade collapsed. Instead, I sat there, staring at the papers, realizing with a sinking certainty that something very wrong had been happening under my nose for a long time. That day, my father asked me to help organize the old records in his study. He said he wanted to clean out files before autumn. I thought he meant ordinary paperwork. I had no idea I was about to find the first piece of proof that would blow up everything. While I was sorting through a pile of tax documents, I found a locked envelope tucked behind a shelf divider. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. It said, "If anything happens to me, do not let Cole handle the house alone." That was all. No date, no explanation, just that one sentence. I sat there for a full minute staring at it. My pulse was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned the envelope over and noticed faint impressions from something written on the page beneath. I ran a pencil over the back the way my art teacher once taught me, and there, appearing like a ghost under pressure, were a few more words. Bank transfer. Asklena. My throat tightened. I didn't understand how serious those words were until the next night, when my mother vanished for 7 hours. She had gone to a hair appointment with a friend. She didn't answer her phone. Cole said she must have turned it off. My father said maybe she had gone to lunch. But when she finally came home, she looked dazed and frightened. And when I asked where she had been, she stared at me as if she didn't know me for a second. Then she said, very softly, "I was at the clinic." Cole appeared in the doorway behind her, so suddenly it felt staged. "She's fine," he said immediately. "She's just tired." My mother's eyes flicked toward him, and that was when I saw it. Fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. Not confusion. Fear. Something in me snapped into place. I made an appointment the next morning with my mother's primary doctor, pretending I wanted to understand her recent fatigue. I'm sure I sounded polite enough because the receptionist booked me in. What I learned there made my skin go numb. I wasn't told everything at once. Doctors can't just hand out private information because you ask nicely. But I did learn enough to know that my mother had been brought in for evaluations, that some appointments had been arranged by Cole, and that a medication had been changed without my father being fully aware of it. I left the office with a polite smile on my face and a storm in my chest. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, like something out of a movie. But I was past the point of waiting for the world to make sense on its own. I needed facts. I needed proof. I needed to know whether I was becoming paranoid or whether my brother was slowly stripping my parents of their minds, their money, and their authority. The investigator was a woman named Marisol, mid-40s, sharp eyes, no nonsense. She asked me what I thought was happening, and I told her the truth as I saw it. She didn't react dramatically. She just said, "Then we document everything." Over the next 3 weeks, she gave me a picture I wish I had never seen. Cole had been moving money from family accounts into a shell consulting company registered under an address in Delaware. He had quietly taken out lines of credit in my father's business name. He had arranged for my mother to sign medical paperwork that gave him access to information he had no right to. He had also been meeting a woman named Dana Mercer, a financial planner who specialized in elder asset protection, except the records suggested she was helping him do the opposite. My father was being pushed out of his own business. My mother was being made easier to control. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Cole was preparing to take the house, the assets, the company, and whatever was left with a face of concern so convincing that no one around him thought to question it. I didn't sleep much after that. What made it worse was that Cole kept acting like the caring one. He'd bring Mom tea. He'd remind Dad to take walks. He'd call me dramatic whenever I asked for transparency. One evening I came home and found him in the kitchen with my mother. They were standing too close, speaking in low voices, and when I walked in, both of them went quiet. "You okay?" I asked Mom. She smiled too quickly. "Of course." Cole took a sip of coffee. "She's just having a rough day." I looked at him. "Then why were you telling her not to answer my questions?" For a fraction of a second, His face flashed with anger. Then it was gone. "You're hearing things." "No, I'm hearing enough." My mother's spoon clinked against the cup in her hand. She stared at the counter. I wanted to say more, but then my father walked in, and Cole's expression transformed again into that calm, reasonable son everyone loved. It was almost beautiful in a horrifying way. He could switch masks without anyone noticing. That night, I sat in my apartment with every document Marisol had sent me and realized I was standing at the edge of the ugliest truth of my life. Cole had not just been lying. He had been building a cage. And somehow our family had been taught to call that loyalty. The major twist came from my mother. I expected the secrets to lead to money, to signatures, maybe to some cruel scheme to take over the business. I was prepared for greed. I was not prepared for what my mother confessed to me in the laundry room at 11:40 p.m., while the dryer hummed in the background. I had come back to the house to pick up some old project files. I found her alone, folding towels with trembling hands. She looked so fragile in that moment that all my anger disappeared for a second. "Mom," I said gently, "what is Cole doing?" Her shoulders stiffened. "Please," I said, "just tell me the truth." She kept folding. "There are things in this family you don't understand." "I understand enough. He's taking money." She closed her eyes. "Mom." Then, without looking at me, she said the words that changed everything. "He's not my son. I swear." The room went silent around me. I thought maybe I had misheard. "What?" She sat down on the laundry basket like her knees had given out. "Not biologically," she whispered. "He came into this family when he was 4. Your father raised him. We both did." My breath caught. "You told everyone he was Dad's." "We were trying to protect him." I stared at her, waiting for the rest, but she wouldn't look at me. Protect him from what? She pressed a towel so hard in her hands that her knuckles turned white. From the man who was supposed to be his father, from the mess that came before. Nothing she said made sense yet, but then she kept talking, and the shape of the truth started to form. Cole's birth father had been violent, unstable, and dangerous in ways my mother had spent decades trying to bury. She had left that life when Cole was little and married my father later, hoping to give him a safer home. My father had adopted Cole legally, raised him as his own, and never once made him feel like less than a son. But Cole grew up feeling split in two. My mother confessed that, as he got older, he learned to weaponize the past. He was charming in public, brutal in private, and he understood early how to make people feel sorry for him. If someone questioned him, he'd talk about abandonment. If they pushed harder, he'd talk about trauma. He had been handed a very real wound, and instead of healing from it, he had turned it into a knife. I stared at my mother, horrified. "Why didn't you tell us?" "We were ashamed," she said. And then when he started helping more around the house, it seemed easier to let people think he was just dependable. He wanted to be seen as the one who kept things together. He needed it. "No," I said quietly. "He needed control." Her eyes filled with tears. That was the moment I understood something I had never wanted to accept. My mother had not been completely ignorant. She had seen parts of him all along. She had feared him. She had covered for him. She had mistaken guilt for love and silence for peace. And in doing that, she had helped build the very machine that was now crushing the family. I left the laundry room shaking. There are truths you can forgive, and then there are truths that rearrange the architecture of a person. Mine was the second kind. The next morning, I met Marisol and my attorney, a woman named Gwen who could have cut steel with her stare. I laid everything out. The documents, the transfers, the doctor's paperwork, the hidden notes, the patterns, the emotional manipulation, the family history. Gwen leaned back in her chair and said, "He's counting on you being scared." I laughed without humor. "I am scared." "Good," she said. "Fear means you still understand what's at stake. Now we use it." We built a case quietly. Every phone call was logged. Every bank record was copied. Every suspicious signature was compared. Every medical authorization was reviewed. My father, once he realized I wasn't imagining things, gave me access to old business archives. At first he looked embarrassed, then angry, then heartbreakingly relieved. There's a certain kind of pain in an older man when he realizes he has been fooled by his own child. I watched my father go through all of it. He kept saying, "I should have seen it." "You trusted him," I told him. "I trusted the wrong person." The hardest part was my mother. She had spent years pretending not to see, and now she was trapped in the fallout. Sometimes she would cry and tell me she never meant for it to go this far. Sometimes she would defend Cole because she felt responsible for what he had become. Sometimes she would look at me with such shame that I had to leave the room. One evening I asked her, "Did you ever love me enough to protect me?" The question landed like a hammer. She stood there with tears in her eyes and said, "I loved you. I just did not know how to be brave." That answer broke something in me that had already been cracked for years. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just nodded, because I was done asking my family to become people they had never learned how to be. The real turning point came when I discovered what Cole had planned for the house. He wasn't just taking assets. He had arranged to sell the property quietly through a holding company once my father was deemed too unstable to sign. The plan was to move my parents into a smaller townhouse, cash out the equity, and place control of the business with outside managers who answered to him. He had already lined up a buyer, and then I found the timing. The sale was scheduled for the week after my mother's funeral. That was when the fury finally beat the fear. He had waited until our mother was dying to make the final move. I sat alone in my apartment with the papers spread across the table and cried harder than I had in years. Not delicate tears, ugly ones. The kind that leave you gasping. Because grief was one thing, but betrayal inside a family is its own language. And once you understand it, you can never unhear it. Still, I didn't break. I got to work. The day of the funeral, I wore a black dress and my mother's pearl earrings. People came up to me all morning saying how strong I was. They had no idea I was carrying more evidence in my purse than some people carry in a lifetime. I had copies of the financial records, the attorney's findings, the timeline of transfers, the legal challenge, and one very important recording. Yes, a recording. 2 nights before the funeral, I had cornered Cole in the garage after he thought everyone was asleep. I told him I knew enough. He laughed at me. Then I said one sentence that changed his entire tone. "I know about the Delaware company." His face went still. I kept going. "I know about the transfers, the fake authorization, the medical paperwork, and the sale." He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it." He stepped toward me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You think you're smart because you found a few folders?" I held my phone at my side, recording the whole thing. He noticed only after he'd already spoken too much. And when he saw the phone, his mouth curled into a look I had never seen from him before. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. Something stripped clean. "You always were a jealous little thing," he said. "Jealous of what?" "Of me." I almost laughed. "Of the person stealing from our parents?" He moved fast then, and for a second I thought he might grab the phone, but he stopped himself. Instead, he smiled and said, "Nobody will believe you. They love me." That was when I knew he had finally said the quiet part out loud. He truly believed the family belonged to him because he had spent his whole life performing the role everyone rewarded. So I waited. I let the funeral begin. I let the chapel fill. I let Cole stand in front of everyone looking like the grieving son who had held the family together. I let him try to quiet me. Then, when he told me not to make a scene, I looked him in the eye and said what I had waited years to say. "I'm not making a scene. I'm ending the lie." The attorney rose from the back row. My father stood up. And then Marisol, who had been sitting near the aisle like an ordinary guest, walked forward with a packet of documents and handed them directly to our family's lawyer, who was not nearly as shocked as he wanted everyone to think. Cole's expression finally changed. Not much, just enough. People began to whisper. My aunt gasped. My cousins turned pale. And when Gwen announced that a formal injunction had already been filed to freeze the house sale and all questionable accounts, my brother's perfect face cracked right down the middle. He tried to interrupt. He said it was all misunderstood. He said I was unstable from grief. He said my father had never been clear-minded, that my mother had been confused, that I had always been dramatic. Then my father stepped forward. I will never forget the way the room went quiet when he said, "Sit down, Cole." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Cole looked at him like a cornered animal. "Dad, don't call me that like you still respect it," my father said. The tears in my eyes blurred the whole room. My father wasn't a man of speeches. He was a man of work, of silence, of calloused hands and steady eyes. To hear him say that was like watching a wall collapse. Cole tried one last angle. "They're turning you against me." My father shook his head. "No, you did that yourself." Then he asked for the records. The legal team presented everything. The fake signatures, the shell company, the unauthorized transfers, the unusual medical paperwork, the sale documents, the recorded conversation from the garage. And that was when Cole made his biggest mistake. He got angry. Not defensive, angry. He looked around the church and said, "I did everything for this family." That sentence hit everyone differently, but to me it sounded exactly like what it was, a confession from a man who believed being useful gave him the right to hurt people. "You did it for yourself," I said. He turned to me, face flushed, voice rising. "I kept this place running while you ran around designing other people's houses." I held his stare. "I built a career. You built a lie." That line landed harder than anything else I could have said, because it was true. While he had spent years controlling our parents, I had spent years building something real. I'd left the family business out of fear of becoming trapped in it. I had taken late-night clients, strange projects, and tiny commissions until my design work started getting attention. I studied on weekends, worked evenings, and slowly created a small but respected interior design studio downtown. I named it Bell and Row not because I wanted to keep the family name, but because I wanted to turn it into something honest. My business was mine. My work was mine. My life was mine. And that mattered more than revenge, even though revenge was the thing that had brought the truth into the light. The final confrontation happened later that week at the attorney's office, where Cole was forced to sit across from all of us with his tie too tight and his jaw locked. He looked smaller there, stripped of the public applause and the protective image he had spent years polishing. My mother sat beside me. My father sat across the table. Gwen laid out the terms. The company records would be audited. The house sale would be blocked. The suspicious transfers would be investigated. The powers of attorney he had collected would be challenged. And if he wanted to avoid criminal charges, he would need to cooperate fully and return everything he had taken. Cole stared at the table for a long time. Then he said, "You're all acting like I forced you." My mother flinched. My father's voice went rough. "You manipulated us." Cole laughed, bitter and sharp. "You never would have given me anything if I hadn't taken it." I remember looking at him and feeling something unexpectedly calm settle inside me. Not sympathy, not hate, clarity. "You're right," I said. "We wouldn't have handed over our lives to you. That's why you took them." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw what was underneath his performance. Not confidence, not entitlement, but terror. Not of losing money, of losing the role that had been feeding him for decades. Some people don't know who they are without being the favored one. He was one of them. The consequences moved fast after that. The bank flagged the transfers. The house sale collapsed. The business partners backed out. The company's outside review uncovered other irregularities that had been hidden for years. Dana Mercer, the planner who had helped him arrange the documents, disappeared from the picture once attorneys started asking the right questions. The local paper picked up the story later, though they softened the details enough to avoid turning our family into a public circus. Cole was not thrown into some dramatic nightmare movie version of justice. Real life doesn't work like that. It worked in a colder, more humiliating way. His access was cut off. His accounts were frozen. His role in the company was terminated. Illegal threats mounted. The people who once praised him started avoiding his calls. And the family members who had believed in his charm began to realize that charm can be another word for camouflage. As for my parents, the damage was permanent in some ways and repairable in others. My father stepped away from the business he had built because he no longer trusted himself to manage it alone. My mother entered a quiet rehabilitation program for the confusion and exhaustion she had been living under. And for the first time in years, she stopped trying to defend the man she had helped protect. She was ashamed. She was broken in places, but she was also finally honest. One afternoon, months later, she sat with me on the back porch and said, "I thought keeping the peace was love." I sipped my tea and looked out at the yard. Sometimes peace is just silence with better furniture. That made her laugh through tears. And it was the first real laugh I had heard from her in years. My father apologized, too, in his own awkward, heavy way. He told me he should have listened sooner. He told me he had mistaken Cole's competence for character. He told me he wished he had treated my instincts with more respect. I didn't give him a speech. I just said, "I know." Because by then I understood something that would have shocked the younger version of me. Forgiveness is not the same thing as forgetting, and love is not the same thing as allowing harm to continue. I forgave them slowly, not all at once, and not because they earned a clean slate. I forgave them because I wanted to stay free, and because I had finally built a life strong enough not to collapse under their mistakes. The best part, the part I think people would call karma if they heard it, was how my own career changed after the truth came out. Word spread through town that I had helped uncover the financial mess inside my family. I hated that the scandal helped, but it did. People who had always seen me as the quiet daughter suddenly saw me as the woman who could organize chaos and tell the truth without blinking. New clients came. Referrals came. A local developer asked me to design a boutique hotel renovation, then a restaurant, then 2 townhouses, and then a historic property in Charlottesville. I had spent years being told I was too sensitive, too quiet, too much in my own head. But those same qualities made me very good at my work. I noticed what others missed. I understood the emotional life of a space. I could walk into a room and feel what it needed to become a home, a business, a sanctuary, a second chance. Within a year, Bell and Row was no longer a side hustle. It was a real studio with 2 employees, a website, and enough clients to keep me busy from sunrise to midnight. I moved into a loft apartment downtown with big windows and an exposed brick wall, and for the first time, I decorated a place without asking anyone's permission. My father came to see the studio one afternoon. He stood in the doorway and looked around like he was seeing me for the first time. "You built all this?" he asked. "Yes?" He nodded slowly. Good. That was his way of saying he was proud. I kept a framed copy of the first invoice I ever issued on the wall near my desk. Not because it was glamorous, but because it reminded me how far I had come from the girl who used to sit in the kitchen wondering why her family felt so dangerous even when they were smiling. Cole eventually left town. There was no grand farewell, no final apology that magically fixed everything. He moved to another state and took a job nowhere near our family circles. The last I heard, he was living smaller than he used to, stripped of the influence that had once made him feel untouchable. Some would call that punishment. I called it reality finally catching up. He sent one letter. It was short. He said he had been angry for a long time. He said he felt invisible growing up. He said he thought if he couldn't be loved honestly, then he would at least be feared, admired, and obeyed. He did not apologize in a way that felt complete, but he admitted enough to prove he understood the shape of what he had done. I read the letter twice and then put it in a drawer. Not every truth needs a reply. The last major thing that happened was the sale of the old house. Not to Cole, not to some secret buyer, but years later, after the dust settled, my parents chose to sell it themselves and move into a smaller home that did not carry quite so much history. My mother said she wanted fewer stairs and fewer memories. My father said he wanted a place where no one could pretend the past was a polished room we had to keep company ready for. On the day we left, I stood in the hallway and looked at the faded wallpaper near the stairs where I had once been a child listening for voices behind closed doors. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be heard in a house that rewarded the loudest mask, the smoothest lie, the prettiest version of loyalty. Then I thought about the life I had built outside it. I thought about the first client who trusted me, the first check I deposited, the first room I finished entirely on my own, the first night I slept in my own apartment knowing I could survive without anyone's permission. My family had taught me how betrayal could wear a smile. My life taught me that freedom does not. And maybe that is the real ending of this story. Not that my brother got exposed, not that the money came back, not that the house was saved. Those things mattered, yes, but they were only the visible pieces. The real ending was this. I stopped being the person my family expected me to be, and I became the woman they could not control. I built my own career from the wreckage. I learned that truth does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it walks in wearing funeral clothes, carrying files in a purse, and asks you to decide whether you will keep being quiet or finally choose your own life. I chose men.